alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm your host, Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is returning guest to the podcast, Jennifer Ann Gordon. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hey, Timothy. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you, and it's always hard to actually start the show with you because it's so fun to chat with you beforehand.
I know. I love the fact that we just chatted for like a half hour and we're like, oh, the show.
Got to do the show now. You're right. Got to record the actual episode. And, I mean, it's selfish of me, but this is why I do the show. It's the fun part is just, well, the show is fun, but the whole conversation is the fun part for me.
I think, as a fellow podcaster, I get it. It's like, I feel like I started my podcast so I could, kind of like educate myself and like talk to amazing writers. And now I love it. It's like one of the highlights of my week because I get to talk to some of the most interesting and fun people you'll ever meet. Mm-hmm. And it's just like great to meet fellow writers and fellow creatives and then become friends with them because we're all crazy.
Yeah, 100% agree. All the insanity that you need bottled.
Yes.
In a podcast.
Especially like it's been quite a socially distant year and a half for many of us. So it's been really great to like expand my weirdo army, I would say. Like my like people that I'm just like, oh, they're the same kind of crazy I am. I love that.
Yeah, some of us just don't quite wear it on our sleeve, but we're there. We're still part. We're Weirdo Army reserves.
I know. I just like put mine out there, like, here I am.
I consider myself more of a Weirdo Army reserve than, and
it's like one weekend a month.
Yeah, but I'm still, but in theory, I'm a citizen soldier, the same as anyone who's been conscripted.
Yeah. Like if we needed you, you're there.
Exactly.
To fight our fights with us.
I had a friend who, it's kind of a weird one, but he said, but it was like, it was just, I won't say the exact quote because it's probably not politically correct anymore, but it was like, I think it was related to Pride Week. And he said, like, I think I'm in some kind of gay reserve. He's straight, but he's like, because he's such an ally. He's a good ally kind of thing. That's all I'm saying. Like, I'm here to back you guys up anyway. It's good stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But he said it in the nerdiest possible way.
And I love that you're like, I feel like I can't quote him.
I'm trying. I had to do it because there's just no other way to say it. It's a good little joke that's also kind of heartwarming, if you ask me.
Oh.
Anyway. And I just paraphrased it because I think he's not very polite, this guy. So he wouldn't care about that. But,
yeah, I get that.
But, I do. I'm a little different. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, Jennifer, have you got any new books out or any work that's been occurring, other than your podcasting, of course, since we last chatted?
So on July 13th, my latest novel just came out. It is called Pretty Ugly. And it is a, dark fantasy, horror, dystopian rom-com.
Ooh.
No, it's not really a rom-com.
Oh.
I went into it thinking I'm going to write a romantic comedy about the end of the world, but then I came up with the idea before COVID, and then I was writing it during COVID, and I realized like it's less funny than I thought it would be to think so many people are dying. So it's a book about a virus. It's not about COVID. It's more of like a flesh-eating bacteria, like your face rots off kind of virus.
Oh, nice.
So like really uplifting. But it's about an Instagram influencer and a failed politician. And it follows their journey through the end of the world. So it's two unrelated storylines, but then they do eventually connect later on in the book. And so there are some kind of funny parts, but mostly it ended up becoming a story about when you know you're dying or you think you're going to die, what do you do internally to prepare for that? Like, do you forgive yourself? Do you forgive other people? Do you finally become the person you were supposed to be, or do you just continue to be a huge asshole?
Yeah.
Swear alert. I just said
That's
asshole.
all fine. That's a very
yeah.
mild one. Like, come on.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a horror novel. There's like a little bit of body horror, little bit of like, it's like a very literary fiction, because I have a very lyrical and poetic style of writing. So yeah,
Well, I noticed that about your. Oh, sorry. Go on.
I was just gonna say, I love this book. I feel like there's so much of me personally in both of these characters, so I feel very strongly about it. And some of the reviews I've been getting have been amazing, because they're just like, you wrote a book about a pandemic and a virus, and the pandemic and the virus is not even like the point of the book. Like, you almost forget it. It's just the frame. It's just like the inciting incident and the shade of the world. It's like the theater curtains, but the story is the characters.
That's really neat. But I was going to say, since I started reading one of your books recently, I forget which one it was. I'm so bad at titles right now.
It's okay. It was probably Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent. Was it the one that won the Kindle Award?
I think so. Yeah, it was.
I know when it started.
It started with I believe it started with a woman giving birth. Was that it?
Oh, okay. That's From Daylight to Madness.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I knew it. I was looking through and I'm like, I'll pick this one based on the cover, and I'm like, oh wow, this is kind of. I was gonna say
that's
already.
My favorite cover. I know I would say that book, From Daylight to Madness, it is. I mean, it starts with a woman giving birth, and then very quickly the child passes away. So it's like right away, it's like very, very triggering.
Yeah.
To a lot of people. So,
I mean, it is horror, in that way.
It's horror.
It's adult horror in the sense that it is horrifying in a realistic way. In that
it's grief horror.
Yes.
And like, I always feel bad when people pick it up without reading the back of the book.
I know.
And then they're just like,
I definitely didn't read the blurb. I was like, that cover is so good.
I know. People buy it for the cover, and then they're just like, I had to put it down after the first chapter because a baby dies, and I'm like, I know, but it's I say it on the back of the book.
Also, how frustrating. I mean, it's not frustrating, but it's how interesting is it that you can have countless books, like fantasy books that aren't even downers necessarily. They're not even considered dark, that have like a parent dying in the first chapter, but a kid dying. Now that's something different. And I understand there's a big difference, but
I understand it too.
Yeah.
And and I wrote it thinking just like, I know this book is not going to be for everybody. It's actually going to be for probably very few people, but it is, it is about like grief. It's a story about like understanding how to move on from something. And it takes place in the Victorian era where people didn't understand how to speak about their emotions, and women, especially at that time, weren't allowed to grieve openly.
Yeah, I'd be like, you're hysterical. We need to medicate. We need to use primitive medicine on you or whatever.
And that's like literally like the first like several chapters of that book is just like her family.
Very difficult. That is very difficult, to be honest. I
read drugging her. It's a very, that book and the book that follows it. It's like I have 2 books in the Hotel series. I love them. They are difficult reads. It is a lot of trauma, and it's a lot of like repressed trauma because it's the Victorian era.
Yeah.
So they say, it's not everybody's cup of tea.
I've heard it said that it's harder to read, it's harder for the reader. Like the reader will feel more pain, more sympathetic pain, when the character can't express it. I think that's very true in this case.
Oh, that's so good. That's like, I love that you said that.
I forget exactly where I read it. It was in some writing book that made that point over and over again. And anyway.
Yeah, no, I love that. So yeah, that's, so like in a way I want to be like, I'm sorry that you're starting with my book From Daylight to Madness.
It's okay. It's okay.
It's my most polarizing work. The one that it either gets like 5 stars or like a 1-star review. And people are like, I hate this woman. I hate her for writing it. How dare you? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. It's funny because I feel like there's no, I can see why that would be, especially because the triggering nature of it. But on the other hand, I think I'll enjoy it once I get into it, because once I get a little further into it, because I like books like, what is it? My favorite book in the Dan Wells' has his series, I'm Not a Serial Killer, was the first book.
Oh, yeah.
And the third book of that is actually very much a grief horror book in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And
like,
it
I
involves
really,
a lot of horrifying, triggering stuff in it.
yeah, like, I love grief horror. Like, I feel like I'm really intrigued by grief writing in general. I take a grief writing class once a week. That's not horror based. It's just about like how to explore grief in all of its forms.
Okay.
And I blame reading Pet Sematary when I was a kid. Like, oh gosh, like I was 10 and I read this book. I thought it was going to be about a cat, and it's about like a father losing his son. So I think to me, I always just feel like that as a horror writer or as a writer of dark fiction, like grief is like the darkest place you can go.
Yeah, even dread and tension don't match it. Yeah.
Yeah, like
those
it's
are
just
potential horrors.
yeah,
Almost.
like grief. I just feel like it's this like weird rock bottom emotionally, and it can come back and get you at any time. So like I love like exploring like your past, a person's memories, a person's past grief, and how that affects them going forward, and how that can kind of relate to maybe something like a haunted house story, or in the case of From Daylight to Madness, it's a book about a mental institution. And even in Pretty Ugly, there's some like grief aspects to it because people have experienced childhood trauma, but they're also kind of like grieving their current selves because the world is, you know, quote unquote ending. People's faces are rotting off. An Instagram influencer can't be that if like half of her face is gone. So it's like sometimes grief isn't death. Sometimes it's like grieving a way of life, or you know, a chance you missed.
The loss
like,
of a relationship that might
a loss of a
maybe you're both still
relationship.
alive and you just can't have that when you
Exactly. So I just feel like for me that's like such an endless place of inspiration to write horror from, is the loss of something that you can't comprehend.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And it does remind me again of that. I think it's the same book that I got that the sympathetic pain from. What line that was? I didn't quote it, but you know that idea. But it was but it was like, you know, the character that you should focus on is the character who's going to suffer the most, was the philosophy of that book.
Yeah.
And there's some amendments to that. If you're not writing, you know, horror, if you're writing fantasy or adventure fiction, you need to have somebody who also can have agency. That's also very important.
Exactly. Or if you're writing, you know, like a romance, or, you know, something like, you need to have that person who you just like really root for and not that you feel bad for. But like horror, like even like crime fiction and noir, like you just like have to have that person who you're just like, oh my God, everything has gone wrong for you. And you have to root for them. And also, I'm also a huge fan of creating people who are just like not likable, but you love them. Like you can be like, you have made every wrong choice in your life, but I understand why you made those wrong choices. And I'm just like here for you to finally make the right choice.
That's so cool. What a great way to put it. That's so
I feel like
powerful.
that's exactly what the book Pretty Ugly is about. Is like just
now,
like
now
you see these people, you're like, oh my God, every wrong decision. But like they're so close to making the right decision.
Yeah, that tantalizing, almost there, but not quite. Yeah.
Yeah, you know.
No, there's so now I'm like, wow, I just want to read this now. But
I hope you do.
I mean, especially with the writing style I've seen from you so far. I'm like, if it's anything like that, wow, this is great. I mean, I'm down, and I'm picky when it comes to writing style. I say this all the time. So, but for some reason, horror writers always get me. The dark side, generally is an easier way of finding my heart, I guess.
I feel like the same for me. And I'm also picky about writing styles. I love literary fiction. I
Mm.
love it, love it, love it. But yeah, the darker it is, I feel like the easier, the same. It's the easiest way to my heart is to just like do something that is like completely screwed up or like horrifyingly sad or just like horrifying in general. Like get me with that and if I like the characters or if I hate the characters but I love them, I'll follow them
Hmm.
forever, like through all their bad decisions and just like hope for the good ones.
Right. Yeah. So I suppose when a character makes a bad decision, but also specifically, how do you make a character? Like you said before, how do you make a character? I mean, because I really, I always, I'm at a loss to this. Maybe it's just the autism speaking, but um, I'm like, how do you make a character that somebody likes, loves, but doesn't necessarily like, right? Like you wouldn't want to be friends with them necessarily, but you love them.
Yeah, like I don't want that person in my life, but I really am rooting for them. Um, Weirdly, I think of it like, and this is going to sound like so weird, but you know how like, do you ever watch Pixar movies?
I've watched a few. I was that. I
I've
grew up
watched
in
a
their
few
heyday.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I've watched a few. I'm not a huge Pixar fan, but in every Pixar movie, there's like the montage. Like the
Yes.
most famous is obviously the montage from Up.
Oh, right. The
Um,
very beginning. I haven't seen that one, but
yeah.
yeah, the very beginning one.
Oh, it's so good. But like Pixar movies do a really good job of like creating these characters and they give you like a couple core memories
Hmm.
from each character that shapes them as a person. Usually it's done in a montage. So I always think of my characters, even the villains, and I give them those like core memories. Like usually something good, usually something where like their feelings were really hurt and then something really dark. So people can see them maybe like as a child before anything terrible happened to them or before they did anything terrible. And you see like that absolute hope and that absolute beauty. And then you see them being hurt by someone or something, or even just like hurting themselves emotionally.
Yeah.
Like because I
No.
just feel
Yeah, it
like
makes so
as
much
all
sense.
of us as kids were the same. Like kids are all the same.
Yeah.
And growing up, I shouldn't say it's all the same, but
But
we
we're
all have
similar.
like
We're all so
we're
kind of
similar.
free and lively in a way, right? Like you're
Yeah,
born. Like that is one of
we're
the weirder things.
born
Yeah, you're born as a not a blank slate necessarily, but as very malleable. Let's say.
malleable. And then like by the time you're we'll say like, you know, 11, 12, 13, like those are the worst years of your life. It's like,
Yeah.
gosh, those are just like, they're so traumatic because it's like hormones and you look ugly and it's junior high. And so I just feel like so many people have, if not the same memories, the same feelings regarding certain parts of our life. And
Yeah.
if I can create something that's unique to my character, but universal in feeling, I think, and this goes for my villains as well. Like, I think that's when people can understand them because they say, I've felt that before. That might not have been my life, but I was
Yeah.
12 and I felt that same horrifying 12-ness of your life.
No, seriously. I mean, the preteen and teen years; those are brutal years.
They're
They're
awful.
so
Like, they're
difficult. I mean,
so
I
awful.
I feel like I got a head start on those almost because, like I said, I mean, I had a bunch of mental disabilities in a way, or at least mental oddities about me, non-neurotypical things like Asperger's syndrome, autism,
Yeah.
ASD, whatever you call it these days. But I was diagnosed later, but I was basically always frustrated with people when I was young. Like I didn't have very long to be a kid who wasn't always angry.
Yeah.
I mean, like by the time I turned 7, I was pretty much angry most of the time. It's crazy. Like at least when I was in
And like
school.
now, like we can like look back on that and say, like, of course, like you had like problems like communicating and people had
Yes.
problems communicating with you. But at the time, it's just like it's so easy to be like labeled like the bad kid. Like, oh,
Yeah.
that kid's always angry. That's the like to like throw out like a 1950s movie term, like a bad seed.
Yeah.
Like,
you think, and there's really no
but,
such
like,
thing.
you
It's
get it
all,
now.
yeah.
There's
Exactly.
no such thing.
At least
But I
not
think
in
that's
my
why I
opinion.
love horror
Yeah.
so much. So it's
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, like people do horrifying things, but like if you can kind of like trace back, like how did they get there from that, as we said, that
Right.
like sort of blank slate at baby and childhood? Like, how does that turn into I'm, murdering somebody when I'm 21? Like,
Right.
what happens? And I think that's why I just love dark fiction in general, whether it's horror, whether it's crime. I'm just like fascinated by like the human psychosis and what I feel like people called in the 50s through the 80s and 90s like abnormal psychology and like
Yes.
abnormal things that now we're starting to understand how like it's not always just like trauma related. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
brain chemicals, sometimes it's a combination
Right.
of so many things.
Right.
And like that's what I just like love to write about, fictionalized versions of all of these puzzles.
I mean, it's fascinating stuff. I mean, I know I mean, for me, I guess it reflected a little differently because having lived through the experience of being baffled by everything and just like hating everybody because I didn't understand what was going on and everyone seemed inexplicable. Like no one seemed like when I did something, I didn't know what was going to happen. Like I say something, and no matter what I say, I didn't know how people would react to it because I couldn't predict that.
Right.
And yeah, it's hard to do that when you're a kid in the first place, and when you almost literally can't do it, or you almost literally think everybody's going to give you a different response than they do give you. That is, it's not hard to see how someone becomes an angry bully who's afraid of everything and
Right.
pissed off all
Right.
the time. Yeah.
I know.
It's-
I think this
just-
is why we're writers. It's
Yes.
like you just have to like explore everything that you couldn't explore. Not saying you, but like you in
I understand.
general.
Yeah, the
like
royal
you.
you. Yeah.
The royal you. Like exploring everything that like you don't understand when you're a kid. Everything you
Yeah.
don't understand that you did. Everything you don't understand that was done to you. And just like taking it to the next level. Like to say like because again I went to school for theater, so like the whole thing with like improv is you get to a certain point and you go like and I feel like that's the same thing with writing and creating characters. It's like you just start with like a core memory and you write until you can't write anymore, and then you think and then what happened, and then you keep going
Yeah.
and then what happened, because like and usually when you get to that and then what happened, there's like a spider web. There's so many things that could happen. And as a writer, we pick one. Sometimes we pick a couple. We figure it out.
Right. And that makes so much sense. I'm saying right a lot, but I just couldn't agree more in a way. There's so much to it that it's both simpler and more complex than it's difficult to express. And it's one of those many lessons that as a writer, when you start out, it is hard to learn stuff because you don't even know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And
Exactly. Like you write your first book and you're just like, I don't even know if that was good. I don't even know if it's structured correctly. I don't know if people are going to hate it.
yeah.
And I feel like actually every book I feel the same way. I'm like, I don't know what I just wrote.
Yes.
Let's just hope
think-
it's coherent.
I feel like every book that I've written that I like in the end is a book that I thought other people were going to hate when I wrote it.
Yes.
Or thought other people were, or it embarrassed me when I wrote it, or something along those lines. Like most of the good books are like, I mean, because I've written a fair number of books that I'm not going to publish because they're just okay, this is not working at all. But like, even my first novel was actually closer to the this could kind of works realm, and I wrote this when I was 13, so it's been a while. But it was closer to it was like okay, it's almost there in a way. Like I wrote all the stuff I wanted in a book, right? Because I was new at it. This was my very first try, so I didn't hold back. And
that's the greatest part.
And that was why that book is so decent compared. I mean, despite the writing style being horrible, the structure being broken, all that stuff. There's some semi-decent stuff in there because it was all the stuff I wanted to put in a book at the time.
Yes.
And that's
I call that good bones, bad meat.
Yes.
Like the bones are good. Like the story's there. Because once you start like writing, when you're like, this is my job, I am a writer, it's so hard to get that like pure joy back of just like writing to write the story you always wanted to. Like once you start thinking about what will my fans think? Will this sell? Is my agent gonna like this? Ooh, is my,
that's
like
killer.
what's happening? Like, and it's so hard to not like stifle yourself. Whereas when you're just writing for the pure joy of it, and I'm not saying that writing's not a joy always, but like it's hard to like.
But pure joy, pure. That's the word we're looking for here. Pure
joy. When you're just like, like word vomiting out like from the depths of your soul.
Yeah.
And you just think, even if nobody reads it, it's fine. I wrote it, and that's all that matters. Yeah. Like once you start selling books, you're like that like depth of your soul. There's like a little part of you that goes, "Oh, people are gonna think the depth of my soul is gross and terrible and awful."
Right, and it's kind of like that line that I think it was Mark Twain. He said like all authors must be orphans, must at least pretend they're orphans.
Yes,
but it's even crazier than that, because the author has to basically always pretend that they don't, even a found family, they can't use the found family. You can't put it on anybody else to say your book is good in a way.
Yeah,
even though in the end that's what they do. It's crazy.
And also, it's just like it's so like because. All writers, we just like, pull bits and pieces from our lives, whether it doesn't matter what genre we're writing in. There's just like, a little fact here, a little fact there. And like, I don't know if you ever feel like that, but like sometimes like when I'm writing, I'm just like, oh, I just like when my family reads this, they're going to see that one tiny moment that is us and be like, I can't believe you put that in a book.
Oh, I don't have that fear. I'm more fear that people are thinking I think I'm really weird sometimes.
Oh,
because I put some weird stuff in my books. Obviously, I mean on occasion.
Yeah, ditto.
I mean, weird, dark shit. Sometimes it just isn't what people might. I mean, because I was. I mean, as much as I was a pissed off kid, I was a pretty good late teenager and adult. That's the thing. I got to be a pretty decent guy, but like. I don't want people to see me as insane,
Right. Pre-COVID, my career, which had been my career for like so many years, was a professional ballroom dance instructor and a professional ballroom dancer. So my job was always like, let in the foxtrot, like, happy, and like, it's a cha-cha, everybody. and then like when my first book came out, Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, that's it's like a really dark ghost story.
Okay.
And so many of my students bought it because this was pre-COVID. Like it was just like right on the brink of COVID. And then they read it because they were just like so excited. But I think they were confused or shocked because like they saw me as being like Gene Kelly, Fred Astaire. Like I'm a living musical. And then I write this book where it's like a woman's stomach is like filled with stones and she's sunk to the bottom of the ocean and she's like carved open and stuff. And they're just like, oh, I thought it was going to be like a romance about like a man falling in love with a ghost. And I'm like, oh,
whoops.
No, that's not what this is.
It's a little different. Just a little bit.
I'm like, oh yeah, no, sorry if that's what I was billing it as. I don't think I was, but I think they just
it's more of an assumption that they make because of your persona as as an instructor.
Yeah, they're just like, oh, it's definitely like it's horror, but it's not going to be horror. And then they read it and they're like, oh,
that was actually
yikes.
Horror. That was horror.
Yeah. And they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know. And then like a few of them like whisper to me, like, maybe you should go back into therapy.
Oh,
I'm like,
come on.
Oh yeah, but like in a good way. But I'm like, I probably should. But like writing's cheaper.
It is. You don't need insurance to write. Well, I mean,
I know.
It helps though.
Helps, really helps.
So Jennifer, we are about out of time. It's been great having you on the show.
I love being here. Thank you so much.
It's always great to have you. I come back anytime.
Like anytime you ask, I'll just be like, "Oh, sure."
Okay,
Sure, I'll be
well,
here.
I'll hold you to that. So, so tell people where they can find the new book and anything else you want to pimp out here.
So, Pretty Ugly, which is pretty dash ugly or / ugly, is available everywhere you can find books. So, of course, it's available on Amazon. But if I had my druthers, I would say please go to bookshop.org and order Pretty Ugly, so that way it goes through your local independent bookseller, because local bookstores have had a really hard time
They need all the help they can
always.
get. Yeah.
I know, always, but especially in the past year and a half. So bookshop.org, or a variety of different places. You can go to my website, which is jenniferannegordon.com, and that's Anne with an E. And there's links to all of my books. You can find signed copies through my local independent bookstore, which is Gibson's Booksellers in Concord, New Hampshire. They do ship. So I would go to my website. You can see everything. If you're in the mood for yet another podcast in your podcasting brain space, I host Vox Vomitus every Wednesday with fellow author Allison Martine. It's Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we talk to best-selling authors working today about all of the mistakes they've made along the way. And we drink.
Oh, it's a good time. So thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks again, Jennifer. It's been awesome. And
Thank you.
as for this podcast, you can find us at mentalcellarpublications.com with a cellar with a C. You go to the mental basement. That's how it works. I should have just did mentalbasement.com, but anyway. But Mental Cellar Publications or timneaterwriter.com. Those are the same site. timneaterwriter.com/books. You can find all the books I've got out, and there's quite a few now. You can see all the covers. Click the links you find interesting. But especially The Forgotten Mask, Temple Theater Book 1, is out. It's out and about, folks. And it is kind of a weird fantasy with some steampunk elements and some dark elements, honestly. The gods are sick. They're lazy. They need somebody to save them for a change. And yet there's still mechanical giants ravaging the world. Yes. And they're mechanical giants, lazy gods, people who are putting on plays to convince said gods to do something about this nonsense. But, see what happens. Thanks for listening, folks. You can find that on Amazon.com and wherever fine print books are sold, everywhere. So thanks for listening, folks. Have a good weekend. Gonna have a good week. It's Sunday, so the weekend's almost over. But enjoy the day and enjoy and I'll talk to you again soon. Sorry, gosh. I'll talk to you again soon, folks. Stay safe out there. Goodbye.
That tears it.